Hello from LafargeHolcim. I'm Brooke Smarts, Market Manager for Cement in Holcim's Mountain Sales Group. I hope this finds you, your families, and colleagues healthy and safe. Thank you for taking the time to join us today as we continue our webinar series on how COVID-19 is impacting our industry. Today we're going to focus on a question that our customers from around the country have asked us. How has COVID-19 impacted federal and state legislation? Today, I'm joined by a panel of experts from the LafargeHolcim Government Affairs team. They work on the legislative issues that affect the company's ability to produce and sell construction materials on federal, state, and local levels. They are locally based in their respective regions of the U.S. and can tell us about what is happening on a national and regional level. I would like to introduce you to our LafargeHolcim Government Affairs panel. First, we have Jason Griffin, who covers the LafargeHolcim Northeast and North Central regions, Jill Benoit, Mid-Atlantic and South regions, and Jackie Clark, Midwest and West regions. Let's get started with our first question. What impact is COVID-19 having on federal and state funding? What is the forecast for the rest of 2020 and outlook for 2021? Jason, can you start us off?
Be happy to. Thanks a lot, Brooke. So I'm going to focus really on the region that I cover. And as you mentioned, it's the North Central, the Northeast, and also the Great Lakes region. So it's kind of a general theme that I've seen across my footprint is most states are seeing about a 30% or more decline in gas tax revenue, which is the primary funding mechanism for infrastructure investment. This hole will be very difficult to plug, considering really the three options would be to raid the general fund dollars that have already been decimated by COVID, cut critical infrastructure projects and repairs, or raise the gas tax, which has proven year after year to be very difficult to do so. From a specific state-by-state budget run through, I'll start on New York, which has faced one of the largest deficits in the country. The current revenue loss for 2020 and 2021 is expected to reach $61 billion, but that is truly only factoring in a first wave. If a second wave hits, all bets are off. Governor Cuomo has authorized the borrowing of $11 billion to fill what he is deeming critical budget holes, but is heavily relying on federal government to backfill the rest. Pennsylvania is looking down the barrel of about a $5 billion deficit with only $340 million in the rainy day fund. So heavy tax increases should be expected when the budget is released prior to the November deadline. Michigan is estimating about a $6.2 billion deficit with roughly $2 billion in rainy day and unspent allocations. Just prior to the COVID shutdowns, Governor Whitmer announced an ambitious $3.5 billion infrastructure bonding plan, which was supposed to be spread out evenly over 4 years, but may be front-ended now to help offset the revenue loss. And Massachusetts is estimating a total loss of about 25% of their overall budget over the next 2 fiscal years. While it's too early to determine exactly how they'll reconcile this difference, with this large of a hit, we can expect tax increases, budget cuts, and most likely some heavy borrowing as well. There are 2 good pieces of news out of my region, looking at Minnesota and Ohio. Minnesota is facing a $2.4 billion deficit, but they have a budget reserve of $2.3 billion. And while they will not want to fully deplete their rainy day fund, minimal cuts will be needed to backfill that hole. And lastly, Ohio was facing a relatively small $775 million gap for 2020, which was already reconciled through cuts by the legislature and the governor after they agreed to no new taxes. And the 2021 gap is looking to be around $2.5 billion, but with $2.7 billion in the rainy day fund, Ohio is in a much better fiscal shape than most. So with that, I'll kick it over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Jason. So almost all of the states in my region are facing significant budget shortfalls. However, some are actually faring just fine during the crisis, and those would be South Carolina and Alabama. They have enough money in their rainy day budgets to get them through the rest of this fiscal year. And then also in states like Louisiana, they're able to take advantage of the federal funding coming down from the passage of the CARES Act. So putting together creative financing swaps to help them also get through the tight budget that they're facing. But right now, in the month of June, we're starting to see states put together new forecasts for the next fiscal year 2021. And once they get those numbers in from sales tax, revenues, et cetera, the states will be able to take a closer look at what they need to do, looking at maybe going into special session in the fall to address what those forecasts produce. Doing a little bit of a deeper dive into my region, starting in the Mid-Atlantic, Virginia actually passed a gas tax increase earlier this year, and it goes into effect in July. So the shortfall that the state was going to be seeing in its transportation budget will actually be shored up from the revenues that are going to be generated from this new increase in the gas tax. So that's good news for Virginia. Moving up north to Maryland, though, that state is facing a $1.1 billion shortfall. So any funds for transportation projects that are coming out of the general fund are absolutely going to be negatively impacted and at risk of being lost. So I will certainly be keeping an eye on that. And then in the South, I just want to point out one state, and that's Texas. So I think that Texas is at a heightened budget crunch just because of the way it generates its revenue for the highway fund. So not only does it get money from gas tax like most states do, but it also gets money from oil and gas production severance taxes and motor vehicle sales taxes. So COVID severely impacted those. We all know at one point the oil and gas market went negative this year. That's historic, never seen before. And then because of the lockdown, no one was out buying cars, another negative impact to that budget stream. So I think that it is too early to know because we're still getting those numbers in, but I think that we're going to see closer to $0 being transferred into those funds. So the immediate impact is still a bit unknown, but it's going to be tough in Texas for the highway fund. And Jackie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jill. I appreciate it. And Brooke, we really do appreciate being invited here as our group in government affairs to the discussion today. And we appreciate the opportunity to share our insights about government policy affecting the construction materials and building industries. In the regions that I cover, the Midwest and the West, and not ever to make any comparison with my colleagues' regions, but I keep saying we're kind of the industry bright spot because we were able in those two regions to really fully stay open with construction projects and delivering product to the marketplace. And in large part, that was due to governors who deemed the industry essential. So projects were even accelerated in some of the communities where we operate. So we were pleased to be a part of that and operating safely and compliant with COVID restrictions for workplaces. So with the exception of the Chicago metro area, the Midwest and the Western states in my portfolio remained, again, largely open. And the caveat here is that some of those states like Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado are dependent on tourism and for their state's economy's success. And those are going to be the economies for the long term that are most negatively affected. You know, casinos just recently reopened within the last couple of weeks. Since we're in late June discussing this, it was a little earlier in June. And obviously in Nevada, we all know that casino revenue is very important to the state's economy. Colorado, and again, with the skiing season being truncated, that was an issue that they're facing budget-wise. And then in Arizona, similarly, we're in the middle of spring training. The whole economy was shut down for those reasons. So Utah is truly a bright spot, and Missouri. Both of those states' economies, while restricted to keeping folks home off the roads, working remotely, they have been able to move some of their finances around in a situation that allows projects to continue or to be slightly delayed. And mostly that's being driven by what the revenue stream will look like approximately July 15th, when states and the federal government will get those income tax returns and with the revenues that flow with them. And we need to remember, optimistically speaking, that 2019 was a very good year for the nation's economy. So hopefully those revenues will be important boosts to both the federal and states' economies. And I know your question too was about the federal level, and I think it's important to mention for the people that are viewing this that a lot of things are going to be happening in Congress toward the end of June and early July. And we expect things really not to be solidified until very late July, early August, before the August recess, where the Congress will be turning its attention from immediate economic relief, where the CARES Act was in place as early as I think it was March 27th, but they'll be looking more on economic recovery and the policy development. Transportation is very much a part of those discussions, and we are engaged in conversations with elected officials, even during the COVID self-isolation that we're all engaged in, to make sure that they understand how important our industry is for the economy's recovery.
Thank you, all of you, and thank you, Jackie. I appreciate your input there. Now we'll go to our second question, which is around climate change and sustainability. We know that climate change and sustainability are key issues for LafargeHolcim and for our industry, but they appear to have taken a back seat due to COVID-19. What is the status of climate change and sustainability legislation, and how has COVID-19 affected it? Jason, can you start us off on this?
Absolutely. So without a doubt, climate policy and sustainability is and will remain a top issue at both the federal and state levels. While it may have taken a back seat due to COVID, as just about everything else has, it will come back, very quickly as a top issue. And while it used to be true to label it kind of a Democrat versus Republican issue, many on both sides of the aisle have seen the writing on the wall and are starting to see that we need to do better and overall reduce our impact and our overall footprint. But that being said, how we reach our goals is still highly debated. So much like in infrastructure funding in the last few years, we've seen states get tired of waiting for federal action and start making moves of their own. A prime example would be New York again, which recently passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was essentially the state's version of the Green New Deal. Originally, this legislation did not factor in energy-intensive trade-exposed industries, such as ours, as well as had little prioritization for domestic manufacturing. But after months of work and hundreds of hours of education, the legislature still passed the CLCPA, but it ultimately gave increased consideration for domestic manufacturing while maintaining very ambitious CO2 reduction targets. And to go hand in hand with the CLCPA, the New York legislature is currently considering legislation that would prioritize low carbon embodied cement and concrete in state procurement. So the bill as currently written would give preferential treatment to any company providing or utilizing low embodied concrete, in turn, low CO2 emitting cement. While this legislation can have immediate hurdles for the ready-mix industry, it will ultimately transform the industry into producing more Type 1L or Portland limestone cement, which will immediately have a positive impact on the CO2 emitted during the cement manufacturing process, as well as encourage innovative solutions such as carbon capture and new uses for CO2, such as Solidia and carbon cure. So what I can tell everybody here is, please know climate and sustainability is still going to be a primary driver. It's just currently on the back burner until we get this COVID funding sorted out. So with that, I'll kick it over to you, Jill.
Thanks. And I would just add that in my region, climate change and sustainability are top priorities as well, especially in the Mid-Atlantic region. And progress on our end had been made in a couple of states as far as introducing legislation, and in particular in Maryland, got pretty far into the process, introducing legislation that would reduce our industry's carbon footprint. Strong support and backing from the leadership in Maryland, and good conversations, productive conversations were being had with the key stakeholders in the state. And then just as the bill was being teed up to be heard in committee, the legislature ended session early, well over a month early. So conversations halted, and the focus for everyone in the state and the governor was on the pandemic and making it through that. So I am starting to see, now we're 3 or 4 months or so past the pandemic, we are starting to see the states coming out of lockdown, and the legislature not only focusing on COVID recovery and the budget, but also getting back to what the priorities and needs of the state are. So conversations are picking back up, and we'll see where that takes us in the fall. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jackie.
Thank you, Jill. The Western region has been active on the carbon policy issues. Colorado is probably the most notable for its level of engagement, what they've already adopted prior to the 2020 session, but they did have a bill this year that we were engaged in the conversation for how we could go about reducing carbon from the cement and concrete industry. The PLC issue that Jason's already articulated was pretty much mirrored in the Colorado legislature from what they were doing in New York. And while the session was bifurcated because of COVID, we do anticipate that issue to come back in 2021, and there'll probably be additional discussions regarding carbon sequestration and other means to reduce the industry's carbon footprint. So while COVID may have delayed the discussion a bit, it is very much an active part of the legislative discussion. Additionally, Jill and I had the good fortune to be in a conversation with some NGOs and other major businesses in the country earlier in the week. And there's still very much a discussion going on in the environmental community and the business community to find paths forward to adopt policy that will benefit the environment and reduce carbon emissions. So we can expect more to be done, even in other states where it hasn't been part of the discussion as much. Utah, Missouri, those are 2 states that I think we'll see some conversation around this topic in the near future. So I think that COVID may have slowed the roll, but I think it will. The conversation about carbon policy will continue.
Thank you. I look forward to that. Located in Denver, as you mentioned, we have a great history of working with Portland limestone cements with our customers in everyday construction, and I look forward to that expanding across the United States. So now we'll transition to our final question. Is the government considering legislation related to residential housing? We've seen a decrease in the rate in new building permits, which could have a negative impact on our business. Jason?
Yeah, so outside of the support that the industry will receive from federal action, such as small business support dollars in the CARES Act, I have not seen states focusing on individual private industries, for specific bailouts per se. There's a lot of discussion around the state-funded industries of sorts, such as infrastructure, education, healthcare facilities, etc. But in many states, looking at like Pennsylvania as an example, as soon as they reopen construction, many contractors have more work than they can even handle, with the biggest hindrance coming from the supply chain and logistics side of the business. With so many folks getting back to work at the same time, it can be difficult simply moving materials. So as states fully recognize and realize the impacts the shutdowns have had, we may see legislation that supports the residential construction industry, but I wouldn't necessarily hold our collective breath, only because there's with the negative impact COVID has had on all industry across the board, it is not one that I see my states necessarily picking up the torch for. But with so many things in flux, you never know, and I know we will be obviously advocating for support for the industry. So Jill, what do you have from your region?
I have similar comments to make, that I also haven't heard anything from the legislature or any builders or anything like that as far as legislation being circulated to help out the housing market. And I would just say for my region, builders are still seeing a demand for new residential homes. And with that, you know, folks are they're not wanting to, they're wanting to live in a new home that no one's ever lived in before. So with that demand, and then if we can start to see the unemployment rate trend down, I think that we'll see a pickup in the buyer and seller, the confidence, and that the housing market will rebound nicely. So we just need to keep an eye on that. And again, you know, the economists, they're forecasting that Q3 is going to be much better. And with that, I think that things will turn around for the industry. Jackie, do you have anything else to add?
Sure. Thank you, Jill. One of the resources that the industry can turn to and that we as a team have looked at is at census.gov. And each month there is a report that comes out. You can wait until the media summarizes it for you. But the next one comes out about July 17th. The most recent one came out June 17th. And that's where all of the nation's building permits are summarized. And we really saw a huge bounce back from the low levels of April to May, which were just reported in June. So that's something positive, something hopeful. Federal policy that really has driven what's going on with the housing industry right now is, as Jason referenced, in the CARES Act. And if you held a federally backed mortgage for a residence or for a multifamily type structure, you were the subject of moratoriums for either foreclosure or for evictions. And there are forbearances offered up to 180 days. So we're still well within that period on the forbearance side. Of course, that means you've got to come up with all that money to meet your mortgage obligation if you are an owner. But in terms of the evictions, they had, I think it was 120 days that they gave the leaseors the opportunity to have the moratorium. So it protected the renters. So once you get past that period, then we may start seeing some other factors come into play in the market that could further affect what happens with the people's immediate need to move into some sort of a residential housing situation, a new build or a purchase of an existing home. I know the realtors have been concerned about the drop in listings and the drop in sales, and that the market's pretty tight for them right now. So I think those are two key factors: the CARES Act and being able to track what's going on in the marketplace through census.gov.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your observations, Jason, Jill, and Jackie, on how COVID-19 has impacted our policy developments at federal, state, and local levels. We will continue to monitor all developments. Thank you very much for everyone for listening. To our customers, we sincerely appreciate your business. And as a valued partner, we are committed to supporting your needs during these uncertain times. And always. If you have any questions, please contact your local sales representative. Thank you for your continued trust in LafargeHolcim and its people. We wish you and your families and employees good health. Take care and be safe. Thank you.